Welcome to the 1960s Project. The 1960s Project brings you voices from the 1960s. This is week 24, session 2 finale. Week 24, session 2 finale. In the 1960s Project, we've been recalling, remembering, and reflecting on events that have influenced our lives. Tonight, we continue with one of our themes, reflections on attending high school and college and working. We have a guest interviewer today, David Lang, who graduated from high school in 1966. David has been a guest on several of our lives since last September. I invite you to check out his blog and watch the lives he participated in. When you read his blog, you'll discover his Black cultural awakening. David also has presented a futuristic scenario, the trial of Elon Musk. David will be interviewing Al Valentine, who graduated from high school in 1968. Before I let David briefly share his background and introduce Al, I have 4 asks. Ask number 1 is for you to like and follow us on Facebook. Ask number 2 is to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us there. Ask number 3 is to read and comment on our blogs. Ask number 4, since this is social media, we ask you to share our shows, videos, and blogs. Welcome, David.
Hello, Jerome. I'm very happy to be hosting the show tonight. Just a brief word about me. I've had a career as a lawyer, a civil rights lawyer, a law professor at St. Louis University and Howard University, and now I'm a government worker at the District of Columbia. And
Okay.
I'm embarking on my 4th career as a writer. I've got a couple of books that will be coming out in about a month or so. And I've been commandeered now to be a talk show host. So this is my 2nd time hosting the show. Our guest today is Al Valentine.
I'm gonna let you have Al. So I'm gonna come down and Al, and you can bring Al up, or Al will come up. Okay, go ahead, David.
All right. So I'd like to introduce our guest for the day, who is Al Valentine. Al is a native of a small town called Westchester, Pennsylvania. Al has had 3 careers. He's had a career as a scientist, as a salesperson, and as I believe he calls himself a philanthropist. And Al graduated from Lincoln University in, I believe, 1972 with a degree in physics. And he went on to become, as I say, a scientist. He advanced a technology for Navy jets while he was in college that's used today. He was recognized by the Joint Chiefs of Staff for advancing the science of image recognition using advanced mathematical techniques. He was offered a full ride and salary for graduate study at Stanford, but he decided to work for Eastman Kodak as a scientist because he liked cameras. And he was the youngest principal researcher in Kodak history and the only one from a historically Black college. He led a team of engineers to win the prestigious Research and Development 100 Award, and along the way was granted 6 inventions in solid state physics. He developed a computer-controlled motion technology, what he calls a small hyperloop, for a very successful office product known as QYX that was started as a project, what he calls Skunk Works, by Exxon in Exton, Pennsylvania. And the original mission was to build electrical vehicles. He was a top worldwide salesperson for a sales team. He was a top performer at major software companies like IBM, Xerox. He sold products throughout the US, Canada, Europe, and Asia. And he also sold to military institutions, in particular in Germany. So that's Al's resume in a nutshell. Oh, one other thing I would mention: he's established a framework for historically black college universities and universities research institutes, and he's on the path to getting a grant for that particular project. So Al has had a very, very interesting three-career life, and we're gonna jump right into it. Now, Al, why don't you tell us a little bit about where you grew up?
Yeah, glad to be here with you, brother David. This is an exciting experience for me. It's my first time. I know you're a veteran at this, but yeah, I grew up in a mill town in Pennsylvania, where it was run by Quakers, and the significance of that is there. It was unusual in that black men were often in skilled positions.
And what was the name of your school?
I'm laughing because in my town of 20,000 people, the Westchester High School was called the Westchester High School.
So there was only one high school in the town.
At the time, it was the high school.
All right. So I take it that was an integrated high school?
Yeah, everybody went to the same school. Yeah, it was integrated. It was stratifications though, big time. But it was yes. Short answer is yes.
Okay. And what percentage of Westchester was black when you were growing up?
Ooh, I didn't prepare for that question. I mean, I would guess, oh gosh, I mean, maybe 10% of the total population.
Okay. All right.
It was a tight knit, like a lot of black communities. It literally was on the other side of the railroad tracks, and it was a tight knit community.
Right. And I understand that there was one major industry in the town, something called the mill.
Yeah, the mill. At one point, it was the largest producer of wooden wheels, and it was a big mill. And it later, as wooden wheels obviously went out of favor, it made other wooden items.
Okay. Now, when you were giving us information and preparing for this particular presentation, you picked as a theme "Raisin in the Sun." Can you tell us why you picked that as a theme?
Well, yeah, because in this tight knit little black community, if you wanted to do something other than work in the mill, you had to expand your horizon into the larger white community. And particularly, I chose to go into science. And very often, when you're in science, you're the only black man in the group. So you're the raisin in the sun.
Okay. Now, you had, I'm assuming, various influences while you were growing up in Westchester.
Yes.
One of the influences was your grandfather, George Wesley Brown.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little about him?
Yeah, he was a peer of W.E.B. Du Bois, and he proudly would tell people that he bought the very first paid subscription to Du Bois' The Crisis magazine, which is his signature publication. So
Right.
they were buds, and he was a writer. My grandfather, was an award-winning writer.
Right. And he wrote a book called Observations on Life.
He
correct?
did. He did.
And what is your understanding of that book? What was in the book?
You know, I was very young, 5, 6 years old, so I didn't have an appreciation of his wisdom at the time, but I did see the adults react to it in a very positive way. He was kind of what I would call the griot of the community, if I can use that analogy.
Sure. Now, how much education did your grandfather have?
Oh, he was a highly educated man. He came out of Tuskegee and Hampton, and was an administrator at Cheney, which is a college in Pennsylvania, for many years. So he was in a community of Black intellectuals that included Paul Robeson, W.B. Du Bois, Asa Randolph, and of course there was the Rustin family, of which Bayard Rustin was one.
All right. Now we'll get to Bayard in a minute. you said your grandfather was at Cheney, and I believe there's a debate that's been going on forever about whether Cheney was the first historically black college in the United States or whether it was Lincoln University that you graduated from.
Degree granting. Lincoln was the first degree granting. Cheney,
Okay.
Cheney may have had some, it had different names. All of these colleges had different names. Lincoln was originally Ashman Institute, more of a theological college, but Lincoln prides itself of being the first degree granting college.
All right. And you indicated that you started Lincoln in 1972.
Well, I
correct?
graduated in 72, yeah.
Excuse me, you graduated in 72.
Yep.
Now, had you always intended to go to college, or did you have
No, no.
Right.
Growing up in the Milltown, I was just, brother, I was just trying to survive. I'll be honest with you. I mean, my grandfather was a landlord, and people associated that mistakenly with wealth. We had no money, and there was a food chain, and I was at the bottom of that food chain. So what I did to survive is I had a hustle. I repaired things. I repaired radios, televisions. Later on, I repaired cars. And that was an essential part of my existence.
Okay. Well, before we get into that, because I want to come back to that, you said that your grandfather was an influence of sorts on you. Tell us a little about your nuclear family. Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah. Well, when my mother's marriage failed, we moved in with my grandfather. My mother was married to a guy in Baltimore, and it was big city. I was a young kid. She wanted to get me out in the country, and she really wanted me to be around a lot of little boys to play sports and things like that. And that was the perfect environment for my grandfather's house. A lot of little boys around that I could pal around with, and he had a large house. And so that my nuclear family was my mother, grandfather, grandmother, who was a talented pianist, and she was good friends with the Ruston matriarch, Julia Davis.
All right. Now, even though you said that in a sense you all didn't have any money, but your grandfather was a landlord, so he owned property. How would you describe your status, your social economic status, in terms of were you middle class, lower middle class? How would you describe that?
I think we had less money than people realize, but I think the perception was that we were middle class. Milltown again, and my grandfather's tenants were creative people, and creative people don't always have money, and mill workers. So they weren't rich clients, if you will. So I would say roughly middle class, but we really, I never had any money. Let me put it that way. I'll be personal about it.
All right, but basically you grew up as an only child, correct?
Of my mother, yes.
Yes.
The reason I say that is we had, expression is it takes a village. We really had a big village of a bunch of kids in my grandfather's house. But technically, yes, I was an only child, but there was all kinds of cousins.
Okay. Now, there was another person who was a presence in your life, and I believe you call her Miss Julia. Can you bring up a picture of Miss Julia?
Miss Julia was the matriarch of the Ruston family. Her and my grandmother were great friends. My grandmother eventually succumbed to Alzheimer's, and anyone who's been through that journey knows how tough that is. But before that, before my grandmother succumbed to Alzheimer's, the two of them, my grandmother Emily and Miss Julia, were the matriarchs of that Black community. And Miss Julia said she had 12 children, 12 Rustons, and I don't disagree with that.
All right.
That's a whole nother session.
All right. Now, I believe probably most of our audience is in the baby boomer group. A few people maybe before the baby boomers, but we're talking about people who went to high school in the '60s, and so that's probably the bulk of our audience. So I would suspect that most people in our audience know something about Bayard Rustin. But can you fill us in on Bayard and what role he played in the civil rights movement?
Sure. Bayard Rustin, who Miss Julie identified as her son, um, would he would he was part of the village that my grandmother created of artists. So it was not unusual for my grandmother to be playing on the piano and Bayard would be singing spirituals, or he may be singing Italian folk songs. he was a character, but he was a brilliant architect of movements. And because we were Milltown, we were next to the railroad. So it was easy for people like A. Philip Randolph, Hazel Randolph, Paul Robeson, others in the movement to come and meet with Bayard in my grandfather's living room.
All right. And then what role did Bayard play in the civil rights movement?
He was most well known for being the architect of the 63 March on Washington. But what's not well known is the 63 March on Washington was originally the 1943 March on Washington with Bayard and Asa Randolph, and they called it off. But the planning for that was an ongoing activity over decades, literally. And they had charts and graphs and maps. And it was a very well thought out event.
Right. And Bayard, as an intellectual, also during the '60s, debated Malcolm X at, I think, Howard University, and then later at a Southern Baptist College. Is that correct?
I believe you are correct.
Now, so Bayard was an influence on you directly or indirectly?
Well, I think, again, I'm very young. I don't know, 5, 6 years old is my guess. And what you notice the people who stand out, and Bayard was flamboyant. So, I mean, that's the question I get most often is, why don't you say Bayard? Because Bayard said Bayard. It's probably Bayard. God forbid if they'd named him Joe, he would have been miserable, And as a child, not having worldly views, you notice people who stand out. I noticed Bayard because he was very expressive. I noticed Asa Randolph because he was always meticulously dressed. And remember, this was a mill town. Overalls was like a Friday night attire.
Right.
So you notice the people that stand out.
All right. Now, so what made you decide to go to college?
I didn't. I had a thriving hustle of repairing stuff, and there were times when I made more than some of the adults in the village, if you will. But I believe, and here's where there are chunks of my memory that I have to fill in. But I believe the matriarchs, that would be my grandmother and Miss Julia, even as a very young child, said this young man needs to go to college. That's my belief. And I believe she set the wheels in motion, kind of a hidden figures kind of thing. Never directly, never had the conversation directly. But, somebody gave me a bus ticket to go to Lincoln, and I was probably more excited about the bus ride than the college. But when I got to Lincoln, I never wanted to leave.
So had you done a tour of Lincoln before you enrolled?
No, not at all. No. I had no clue where. I didn't know where the bus was going.
So what did you
learn about? It was
about
the Short
Lincoln?
Line, by the way. That was the name of the company, Short Line Bus Company.
What had you heard about Lincoln since you ended up applying there?
I didn't. I mean, I literally, crazy as it sounds, my first exposure is when I was sitting there, and I believe that Well, Lincoln at the time was in the process of leadership transition to eventually Dr. Branson, who was trying to build the greatest physics department, I think, certainly among HBCUs. And I believe he had a problem of having more professors potentially than he had students.
All right, before we get to Dr. Branson, can
Okay.
we bring up the picture of Al as a
Oh my God, you're not going to do that, are you? Are you going to do that?
absolutely.
Okay.
All right.
Oh,
So
that hurt.
how old were you when this photo was taken, Al?
Oh, I don't know. Probably, whatever you are when 1970, probably 18, 19, maybe 20 years old at most.
All right, so this is a college photo.
Yes, yes.
All right. And I think I had mentioned to you that most people, in looking at that photo, if we put a cartoon bubble behind them, their underlying thoughts and feelings would be, this is a nerd. I mean, you got the big Urkel type glasses, So
I think I had a plastic pen protector too. Yeah, I was.
So you arrived on Lincoln's campus, you were kind of pushed there by Miss Julia and other influences. Now you're on campus, and you decided at that time that you wanted to be a scientist. Or how did that come about?
Well, I think that again, they had a problem that they needed physics students. They couldn't have more professors than students. So I think they made it attractive for me to study that line because they saw that I had the aptitude. They said, this kid's got the aptitude. We seriously need somebody in this program. And I think that was the connection.
Well, I understand, but when you first got to Lincoln, you hadn't decided on a major, correct?
That is correct.
All right.
That is correct. I want to do something in the sciences, if you will, physical sciences.
So you knew that's an area that you wanted to go into.
Yeah, it could have been chemistry, for example. It could have been math.
All right. So I take it you'd always been good in math in high school.
I excelled in math in high school and throughout my career.
All right. So you was physics, of course, that was a freshman course at Lincoln?
Was it a freshman course? Yeah, I guess the answer is yes. I'm sorry.
Okay. So you're taking freshman physics, but you hadn't decided that you wanted to be a physicist at that point, correct?
Well, I probably from once I first got in the course, they had just a deep bench. I mean, my goodness, we had six physics professors in this little small HBCU. If you include Branson, you had Surfer J. McCrary, you had Mr. Ty, you had Sabrina Christensen, you had Cozy Coles. It was a deep bench of instructors. So yes, it was easy to fall in love with that. It was one-to-one instruction.
Okay. So you were in physics, you had a mathematical background, you had already decided that you wanted to be a scientist, and you indicated that Dr. Branson was another big influence on you?
Yeah. He was an impressive figure. I believe he's one of the greatest scientists of the 20th century.
Why so?
Well, he invented the basic protein of human life, what's so-called the Branson helix, which Linus Pauling took credit for, won the Nobel Prize twice. And by the way, Branson called that invention, he named it after his fraternity. He called it the alpha helix.
Okay. So Dr. Branson was a major influence on you. And you said he named it after his fraternity.
I believe so, yeah.
Did you join a fraternity while you were
in
Lincoln?
I became an alpha.
Okay. All right. So you're an alpha man.
Correct.
All right. Now, can you tell us, let's go in, focus in on your freshman year at Lincoln. Were you living in the dorm?
McCrary Hall, first floor.
All right. And you had a roommate?
Gil Scott Heron, Spider.
All right. Can we bring up Gil's photo? All right. So
We're waiting on it. I would describe him as one of the most joyous people I've come in contact with in life.
As one of the most what?
Joyous, joy-filled, joyous.
Okay. Now, so Al is your roommate.
Yes,
I mean, Gil is your roommate.
yes.
And um, was there a contrast between your background and that of your roommate, Gil
Oh
Scott Heron?
yeah, yeah. We were different people. I was a scientist. He had never been around scientists, and he let me answer it by saying he was an intense observer of people, and he was fascinating by this personality, this science personality that he had not experienced before.
All right. And I believe that he had a nickname on campus, which was Spider.
Yeah, at the time he didn't want to. One of the themes at Lincoln is you didn't embrace your slave name, and he fell into that, so he preferred Spider.
All right. Now, at the time that Gil was your roommate, he hadn't, I guess, burst onto the national scene with his poetry, his famous "Revolution Will Not Be Televised." So, can you tell us about his development in relation to yours and the interaction that the two of y'all had as roommates?
Yeah, well, Lincoln has a long-standing tradition called rabble. It's an oral tradition, especially among when it was all men, and we would go back and forth and trade ideas. And I would hear years later echoes of my rabble with Lincoln, with Spider, and I couldn't figure out. I mean, it's like 10 years later, I'd see something on an album. I'm like, well, it can't be 10 years. And I talked to some of my writer friends who said, oh, yeah, that's not unusual. A writer will hear a phrase or a thought or even a sound, and they'll put a pin in it. And 10 years later, they'll make that part of a character development. So a lot of the rabble that I had with Spider, I think I'll call it Morning, First Minute of a New Day, Diddly Dot Dot, Johannesburg, and of course, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. I now realize were discussions I had with Spider in McCurry Hall.
You mean conversations that you had were a genesis for some of Spider's later works?
Correct. And sometimes they would appear in different form. Can I give you a quick example? One of the party chants at Lincoln, and a lot of Lincolnites will appreciate this. On Friday night, you'd hear, what's the word? Thunderbird. So what was one of Spider's greatest hit on the Arista label? What's the word? Johannesburg. But see, he took that framework and repositioned it into a different concept.
Okay. Now, going back to your Lincoln photograph, I would like to say, back in the day, we had color consciousness was an issue on most historically Black college campuses. It certainly was an issue on Howard's campus, and we had an expression for persons of your complexion was light, bright, and damn near white. And there was certain advantages that light-skinned people had, including light-skinned students. Was that in effect while you were at Lincoln, and were you the beneficiary of that, in your opinion?
I'm aware of that, but I don't have any stories to tell about how that affected me personally. I would say something. I would say there was a different phenomena, if I may. I don't want to dodge a question, but I think a bigger phenomena was Lincoln had some very wealthy people who, at the time, dressed down so that they would fit in. And I think of, for example, a good friend of mine, my running buddy Tony Bass, used to participate in airplane races in Australia, when he wasn't racing yachts in Martha's Vineyard. But at Lincoln, he wore a beat up army jacket so that he would fit in. And I'm talking about Spider. Spider was from a very privileged background. He was the son of an international sports star and an opera singer who had gone to a very famous prep school in Upper West Side of New York, Fieldston Prep. But no, you would know that the way he dressed. So that would be my response to the question. I think there was a reverse kind of phenomenon.
All right, I understand. Now, when you were a freshman, sophomore at Lincoln, was there any kind of Black cultural revolution taking place on campus?
I would say yes, but there was sympathies towards that. Yes.
Well, I believe that Gil Scott Heron, didn't he write didn't one of his songs cause a lot of controversy in terms of the Lincoln community, especially among alumni and so forth?
I'm not aware of that. No, I'm not aware of that.
Well, I thought you told me at one point he wrote something.
He wrote a book.
Okay, his book then. Well, that's a work. So
okay.
What was the book that you were referring to?
Yeah, he wrote a book. There was, I think people didn't realize that Lincoln was in a very precarious financial situation, in my opinion. And it was literally on the brink of extinction. And the Pennsylvania State Legislature, as I understand it, wanted to merge it with Shippensburg State. And there were people within the all-white Pennsylvania legislature that referred to HBCUs as nigger factories.
Right.
And Spider, unfortunately, well, my opinion, wrote a book with the title, The Nigger Factory. That was one of the things he did. I thought, and we talked about that, I thought it was a bad choice for a title. It's not a discussion of literary freedom. I just thought it was a bad choice at that time, because one of my fundamental beliefs in life is you don't bite the hand that feeds you.
Well, but in terms of what was going on in terms of Black consciousness at the time that Spider wrote that book, wasn't it true that I can certainly say at Howard, we had a student revolution, and our position basically was that the students were treated by the faculty as nigger, and we called Howard a plantation. And so we had this major cultural movement that took place in the 60s. We ran the first Black homecoming, the first homecoming queen at Howard while I was there, who had a natural. And so this wasn't something that was just limited to Howard. This was going on all over the country at Black colleges, because there had been a perception by students that they didn't have very many rights, that the faculties were tended to be very bourgeois, and they looked down on students generally. And so I'm asking you to compare my experience with your experience with mine. Wasn't that true at Lincoln, and wouldn't that have been the genesis, and at least for the book that Gil Scott Heron wrote?
Well, let me answer it this way. I don't have a problem with what he wrote. I thought the title was just a mistake. But let me answer the question this way. One of the things I did at Lincoln is I created a radio station. And the significance of that is it was an outlet for those expressions. I'll tell a quick story. I was also good friends with Gil's bandmate, Brian Jackson. And Brian Jackson said, "Brother, thank you for creating the radio station, because to your point about being bourgeois, the music program, as it were, was studying Chopin and Beethoven." He said, "I didn't come to Lincoln to study Chopin's etudes. I wanted to explore other forms of expression, and the radio station gave me an outlet to do that. So I think that's the answer I would give to the question that you raised.
All right. So there does appear then to be some commonality in terms of the experiences that we were all having at historically black colleges in the 60s in terms of coming into what I'm going to call knowledge of self and becoming more militant and having a more black nationalistic viewpoint. Would that be a fair statement?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I'll end it at that.
All right. Well, did you go through a transformation in terms of, let's say, your dress when you were a student at Lincoln? You know, dashikis became the rage, and everybody either had dashikis or they had bush jackets. Were you ever a part of that black dress movement?
Well, can I answer it by telling you the story behind the revolution will not be televised?
Absolutely.
Well, to your point, there was a movement. There was some people who felt that we had to protest something. Now, Lincoln, for those of you who don't know, is out in the country. I mean, the closest thing to Lincoln was like cows, you know. And there was a small town called Oxford, and we were going to. There were some people who wanted to protest the largest business in Oxford. The largest business in Oxford was the feed and lumber store. So I overheard some sorority women saying, well, we're going to the protest. Should we have matching colors? Geez, I've got some new chandelier earrings. You think they would be cute? And part of my rabble with Spider was these women think that they're going to broadcast the march on the feed and lumber store. And his response was, no, brother, the revolution will not be televised. And then we went back and forth with a rabble for hours. But again, going back to what I was saying earlier, that was a thought, a concept that he later repurposed into a political statement. But yeah, I think there was that element of consciousness. A lot of, as I said, wealthy people, I told the story of my friend Tony, who wanted to be a part of the movement and not be a part of the bourgeoisie aristocracy, if you will.
Okay. Now, have your views on Gil Scott-Heron changed since you graduated from Lincoln?
No, I don't know that they've changed. I guess if I have some heartburn, it comes out at a time. My experience with him, he was full of joy. He had this infectious laughter that he would start laughing in the corner of the room about something, and you would just start laughing along with him, not knowing what it was. Very warm and charming person. And I bristle sometimes when I see him characterized other than that. I think where people got confused is, and the writers who are listening would probably help me, is he was such a dedicated to his craft of writing that if he were to write a character, he would become that character. So if he was thinking about writing about a brother that came back from 2 tours at Nam, he would become that character. He would walk around campus in an old beat up army jacket, you know, looking like with 3 weeks of growth, looking like he was downtrodden. He was not as a person. I'll tell you one quick story. He wrote Your Daddy Loves You about a divorced father when he was in McCurry Hall. He was not married, divorced, nor had a child. But that song, it resonates so strongly with divorced men. I've seen grown men cry when that song comes on.
All right.
He was a great writer.
I got you. Now, since you mentioned Gil and being married, the fact that he was not married, and so forth, tell us a little about your romance life. Were you a typical male student?
What happened in McCurry Hall stays in McCurry Hall, brother. In fact, I'll tell you, they announced that they're getting ready. They plan to finally demolish it, and the secrets that'll go with it. Anyhow, that's not your question.
Well, you are a married man, correct?
I am. I'm married to, some people would relate to this, a Girls High girl. Girls High was an elite public school in Philadelphia.
Can you tell us a little more about Girls High Girl?
Girls are special. I can hear them in the background chanting now. So my wife, I met after I spent a couple years at Lincoln. I went to Philadelphia and I attended Drexel University. It was part of the formal program. In Drexel, in Philadelphia, put all the colleges in the same area called University City. So there was Drexel, Penn, Hahnemann, Textile. There's a couple of art schools. And
Okay, but let me stop. You were still a student at Lincoln while you were also attending Drexel?
Yeah, Branson.
Explain that to us, please.
Yeah, Lincoln didn't have an engineering degree. So Branson formed a relationship with Drexel where his students could finish the engineering program in Philadelphia.
Okay.
So I
but you weren't
my
an engineer, you ended up being a physicist, correct?
Yeah, you would come away with 2 degrees. So you'd have a physics degree from Lincoln and an engineering degree from Drexel.
All right. So you met your future wife at the time while you were attending Drexel.
Correct. In Philadelphia, University City, at one of the mixers, probably Smokey Joe's. In fact, it was Smokey Joe's, which is a notorious hangout in Philadelphia college circles.
So was it love at first sight, or was this a relationship?
No. It was just the friendship that developed over a period of time, and we just finally decided years later, actually after I was working at Kodak, that we decided to get married. But we were constant companions.
Okay. And did she have a background in science like you?
She actually is pre-med. She comes from a line of actually prestigious doctors. In fact, most people assume that she's a doctor, but she chose not to. But her coursework at Penn, where she was pre-med.
So pre-med was what, primarily biological science?
Yeah, I think you have to check the box in the biology major, but you're really pre-med.
Okay. So she had basically a science background like you did. It was just in the life sciences, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, she was just on a track because her family had been doctors that they wanted her to be a doctor.
Well, I understand, but doctors study science, and so I mean,
I don't think she
somebody who
loved
was
science.
in fine arts is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, true. I don't think she loved sciences. She wasn't planning to be. She never worked in a biology lab. Let me put it that way.
Okay, all right. But you all did have similar backgrounds in science.
Okay, I'll go with that.
All right.
Fair.
All right. Now, you ended up taking a job when you graduated from Lincoln as a salesperson?
No, I went into science.
Okay, so explain that to us a little more depth.
Well, actually, we got 2 hours. Actually, Drexel was unique because you could trade real world experience for classroom experience. And I actually mentioned I was a math wizard, and I could do mathematics that was central to image recognition for the Navy. So my last 2 quarters at Drexel, they strapped me in the back of a P3 Charlie, a Navy jet, and had me writing code that would recognize images. And that was for credit to graduate.
Right. So did you finish your last year at Drexel or your last year at Lincoln?
Well, physically in Philadelphia at Drexel. Yeah,
Okay.
I didn't go back to Lincoln's campus. There was no need to.
All right. And so your first job was how would you describe your first job?
Well, first job, the Navy wanted to keep me, but I didn't want the Navy. So first job was at Eastman Kodak, where I was the youngest principal researcher. And I was a scientist. I was a physicist. I asked them to build what they call a fab facility to make devices. and and they did.
Well,
So
what
I had
else?
my own tab line.
What else did Eastman Kodak make beside cameras? Because when I think of cameras, I don't normally think of physics.
No. Kodak primarily was a chemical company. I mean, they did some just amazing things in chemistry. In film, this is back when you're talking about film. Film is basically a chemical process. So actually, the cameras were just a way to sell the film. So they and they had most consumers know Kodak as like a brownie camera, but Kodak had a huge professional business. I developed products that you would use in a large hospital, for example, which most consumers, most normal average people wouldn't know about unless you're a radiologist.
So how long did you stay with Kodak?
It was a Kodak about 4 years, I think. I think it was 4 years, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, and then what was your next career path?
So I went to Exxon, which had this secret project in Exton. Um, so we were designing what we call linear motor, which I call a little hyperloop.
And would you explain to the audience what that is, what that means, a hyperloop?
I don't know if people are following. It's your buddy Elon Musk, who is trying to change the way we move from place to place through tunnels using what's known as a linear motor. It gets a little wonky, but the point of it being is that same motion technology is what we were building into an office product back in, I don't know, 74, 76, something like that.
And what was the office product?
It was a typewriter. It was a brand of products called Quicks. I think you mentioned it. It was Quicks, was a line of office products, primarily a typewriter.
And so how did your invention relate to the typewriter?
Well, it's the motion of the carriage, the moving parts within the typewriter. I feel like I'm giving a physics session now. Most motors are what they call reciprocating. In other words, they turn in a circular motion. This one did not. It was a linear motor, which is which was very unique. It's still unique, a way of doing things.
Right. Now, one of the discussions we've been having in our group, which you are a part, what I call our little intellectual chat group, is about how we can get more people of color into STEM areas: science, technology, engineering, math. And do you have some opinions about why there are not as many people of color in STEM careers?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing. I've bootstrapped an organization called the HBCU Research Institute, HRI. It's the first of its kind to go head to head against SRI and MITRE and Lincoln Labs. Now, the HRI, is part of a consortium of activities designed to get more Black and brown people in the sciences. I think one of the things I mentioned to you in a separate discussion was how I did several events at Founders. Any Howard grads out there will know what Founders is.
Founders Library.
Founders Library, yep, Founders. To expose people of color to prominent Black men in the Washington, D.C. area that they normally would not come across. And that's very successful. So I guess the long answer to a short question is exposure to careers is a good starting point. Good starting point. And this is, I saw Kella was asking, so this is when I talk about why always be networking. I'm a big fan myself of networking, and I encourage people of color who want to go into science and engineering to get out there and talk to people and say, hey, I have an interest, and tell me what this is like, tell me what you're doing, and tell me what your path was.
All right. We have a question from the audience from Okella Trice, which is,
Okella.
do you recognize the name of John Harris, who worked for Kodak from 1970 to 1980?
I recognize the name. Yeah, you'd have to give me some more. But yeah, I recognize the name, but I don't have much more to offer than that.
Well, I'm just assuming, strike me if I'm wrong, that there weren't a lot of black people working at Kodak in science positions when you were there.
It's true, but if you're in some of these elite teams, you really don't interact with the greater community. So the worst case is I've sold into the intelligence community, and you can literally be sitting next to someone and not never speak to them. So it's possible he could have been there, and our paths would never have crossed.
Okay. Now, you were saying that you believe in networking, so I take it you believe that that's a good way for people of color, blacks in particular, to further careers in science. Is that correct?
Yes, and particularly I'm so jealous of what I call the kids. Anyone under 40 is a kid, by the way.
Right.
I'm so jealous of the kids that with social media, I mean, you can just click on these groups and participate. So yeah, no, I think that's a great way. And for Atella, I mean, be bold. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is they kick you out.
Well, when you and I were talking last week in preparation for the show, you mentioned to me that you had these programs at Founders Library at Howard, but you didn't feel that the students took advantage of networking after you had introduced, brought in people who were in science, and you felt they didn't really take advantage of the opportunities.
It's the boldness factor. I mean, my opinion, a lot of folks are timid. And I think, if they're there for you, walk up to them and say, hey, my name is, stick your hand out there and get a handshake. And I'd like to see more of that.
All right. I see Jerome is back on screen.
He's
the hall monitor.
Yeah. You guys are carrying on. You drop, as they say, the kids, so you dropping a lot of pearls. You sharing a lot of information. We're learning.
Hall monitor's back.
Growing up, I wouldn't consider myself a hall monitor, but I'm one
kidding you, brother.
Appreciate the questions that David's asked, and we found out about your growing up in a community that was rich with civil rights leaders. We still don't quite sure that we didn't quite get a handle on what it meant to be an accidental scientist. You just one day you woke up, you're a scientist. So we have to get you back to tease that out a little bit more.
Fair enough.
And your roommate was Gil Scott Heron, and we found out he had a nickname named Spider.
Spider.
And you saying being bold, I think you being mighty bold saying you wrote Spider's lyrics.
Well, I didn't know, honestly, until I talked to writers, that writers hear concepts and they use them 10 years later. And they use them in a different way.
What is it, a rabble? R-A-B-E-L or R-E-B-E-L?
Yeah, rabble is a Lincoln tradition. It goes back to the 1920s.
What is the tradition?
It's an oral tradition. It's a precursor to rap. We used to have rabble battles, and people ask, well, what was that? The best example I can give is like, if you're familiar with rap battles, it's the same concept. At least to me, it is.
David, you want to pick up that question that just popped up?
Yeah, we have a question from Mr. Charles Robinson. He wants to know what it was like rooming with Gil Scott Heron.
Oh, it was perfect. It really was, because first of all, we had opposite schedules. And the thing I always like to point out is that Spider Gil was a very warm, charming, and funny guy. He was a funny guy to be around.
What's your most, somebody just popped up, what's your most notable memory of Gil Scott Heron? You saying that he was joyous and nice to be around.
My most memorable story, to people who went to Lincoln, that probably won't know this, people who went to Lincoln know Sissy's, which was the sandwich shop off campus. But very few people knew Sissy, because Sissy was always working. She was working 12 hours a day, keeping the business going. Spider would go over to Sissy's at closing and sit there and talk while she was cleaning up for the next day and get to know her. And I bet you there's a character either in his raps or writings that is Sissy. And I think that's something that people don't know about him.
Hey, David, you have a question that you didn't get a chance to before we close up?
No, I think I covered everything that I wanted to. I thought that it was a very enlightening interview, and I think you kind of captured it. It appears like Al was the accidental scientist. He just kind of like stumbled into becoming.
I'm going to steal that title.
All right.
Can I steal it? Did you copyright that?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Like the accidental tourist, you're the accidental physicist.
Well, Al, we got another question about what's your on your clipboard.
I was telling David that my success was on being bold. I always did stuff that people always. If people don't tell me I'm crazy,
what's the hashtag ABN?
Always be networking.
And what's the TED?
Reach outside your swim lane. The original TED concept was technology people interacting with entertainment people, interacting with design people, interacting with technology people. The idea is don't get stuck in your swim lane.
Okay.
We have one other question.
Go ahead.
Someone wants to know, Kenya Marie Farmer wants to know, are any of the groups that you started still in existence? You mentioned some campus groups, and she'd like to know whether any of them are still around.
Well, if you're talking about HRI, what I do best is I create stuff that didn't exist. And when I create them, I pass them on to others. So I've turned over my day-to-day, my 18-hour days to a 4-star retired general to take forward. So yes, it still exists. It's under direction of the day-to-day direction. But more importantly, it's part of a consortium of activities, I would say, I hope I'm saying this right, driven by the business school, Dr. Gant at Howard, who has created this wonderful consortia of groups with similar focus.
Does the name Kip Ward mean anything to you?
That is the 4-star general, yes.
All right.
General Ward has taken over the day-to-day.
Somebody just mentioned that.
Yeah. Okay. See, my strength is starting stuff. I don't really want to run it forever, but I want to create things that don't exist, and then other people can, run it from there.
Well, thank you, Al, and thank you, David, and thanks everybody for joining in. Again, I invite everybody to read our blogs, watch our videos, and if you're interested in sharing your tiny thoughts and large memories, just reach out to us. Again, this is week 24, season 2 finale, and we'll let you know when we'll be back for season 3. Again, Al, thank you. Again, David, thank you very much, and good night, everyone.
Good night. Good night, all.